So, hi, Daniel.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
No, thank you for joining me. I do want to mention up front that I'm not just cosplaying as a podcaster. These cans are just literally all I could find. I left my buds at home, so. But yeah, maybe looks a little bit more official. I'm not sure, or just sort of goofy. So let me introduce us first. This is Turingsaurus Lex, a podcast on law and AI presented by Marveri. I am Mike Dockery. I'm a former corporate M&A partner at Morrison Forrester. I'm currently the director of product and chief legal officer at Marveri. You are Daniel Schwarcz. You are the Fredrikson and Byron Professor of Law at the University of Minnesota. Your research explores, among a bunch of other things, the impact of artificial intelligence on legal education, the practice of law, and consumer protection. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so we have spoken before, but really excited to have you on. I think some of the research that you're doing is different in a really interesting way for me. There's been a lot of talk about sort of benchmarking AI tools in terms of like their ability to do legal work.
Yeah.
But I think what really stands out about what you are and your co-authors are researching is you really have a focus on like how do humans and AI work together. How does AI improve human lawyering?
Yeah.
So yeah, would love to just I can sort of jump into it. I think there's a lot of aspects of your research that I found really fascinating, but do you want to just give a brief overview?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, so there are the conventional way to measure the capabilities of these AI tools is through benchmarking tasks, and those are very useful. They are particularly useful at telling us sort of vaguely what the capacities of an AI are to perform legal work, and comparing different AI models and comparing change over time. They're easier to do, they're more mechanistic, they're very easy to compare. The real difficulty, though, is ultimately what most people care about these days, most lawyers, is how does AI use affect what I do? How can I use AIs to be more effective or efficient? And it's pretty universally understood you can't just turn over everything you do to an AI. It doesn't have the capabilities. It will hallucinate. It will. So everyone understands, like, lawyers have an ethical obligation to use care when using AI, to check what AI does, and practically they need to. And so the real relevant question then is,
I think you may be slightly exaggerating when you say everyone understands that, but hopefully most people should.
Most people, yes, most people
we
should.
Encourage everyone to understand that, definitely.
Right, exactly. And so if given that, like, if we start from that premise that you can't just turn over all of your work to an AI, that you have to, there has to be a human in the loop for various ethical and practical reasons, then really what you want to know is not how does an AI perform on an exam compared to another AI. You want to know, how do I perform when I'm not using an AI versus when I am using an AI? That's the relevant question. And benchmarking actually doesn't answer that question. You could have a tool that performs very well on an exam, but actually makes you a worse lawyer in some way, right? And there are various, methods through which that could happen, right? Maybe using the AI sort of prevents you from exercising your own judgment. Maybe it's very hard to sort of put together what the AI does and what you do. Maybe you end up spending more time checking the AI than you would have spent doing. So all sorts of ways in which, just because the AI can pass the bar exam or write a legal memo in a tone, doesn't mean actually it's going to be helpful to you. And so that's where my research comes in. What we do is we really focus in on that question of how does a human without AI compare to a human with AI? And we do it by using randomized control trials, which effectively we use law students, because it's basically impossible to do this with real lawyers because of how expensive they are. And we get, upper level law students at good law schools to perform a variety of legal tasks, and we randomly assign them to either use AI or not use AI, varying based on the task. And so we can basically measure for any one individual how do they perform when they have AI versus when they don't, compared to the average. And we can say a lot of things about that. We can say, what happens to the speed of their work, what happens to the quality of their work. Because another thing we do differently is a lot of these benchmarking studies, because they want to be automated, they want to be able to run a benchmark really quickly, they either rely on objective measures. And frankly, quality of legal work is very hard to measure objectively in many contexts. So you get very artificial measures or very artificial questions. Or else, even more questionably, they rely on AI scoring systems to assess quality. And there's no evidence that I know of that I wish AIs could effectively grade and consistently grade work. It would make my job easier. But there's no evidence that they can. So
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, like, in our experience, so generally what we do is we have for our own benchmarking, we will have attorney produced benchmarking data, but then we will use AI to sort of match. And early when we were figuring out that process, like, you almost get into this infinite loop of like, now I have to check that the matching
right
is happening correctly. It didn't always happen. I think we've got a pretty good sense of sort of where we are on the accuracy of that. But the other thing is, like, even if you're matching against human data, right? Like, humans make mistakes. So like we have to dig in manually to our results and say, all we know from the matching is that it doesn't match. And like, so we have to figure out, is that because the AI messed up? Is that because the human messed up? Is because maybe they both messed up? Or maybe it's just an ambiguous question. Like, there's so much that goes into that. So it's really
there are multiple ways of doing good legal work too, right?
Yeah.
Again, depending on the task, there can be a variety of different ways of making an effective argument, or drafting an effective clause, or structuring a deal effectively. So it's just so again, what we do with that is we use real human graders who blindly grade. And using standardized rubrics that we develop ahead of time. So that's our basic approach. And if I can move on to result if you want, which is sort of the natural next question.
So how did it go?
Right. So I think it's really helpful to have data on this again, because this is the key question people care about. And I would say that we have, we've done a number of these in different AI systems for different tasks, for different types of students. And we have I would say a pretty consistent set of findings that AI does improve the speed at which lawyers can produce work. And that's perhaps not terribly surprising. Our ranges are anywhere from 10 to 35 to 40%, depending on the task, depending on the individual, depending on the AI system. But where we've really seen change lately is on the quality of work. So in our early experiments using GPT-4, we did not see improvements in work on average across our participants. In later research, so our most recent paper, which is I have with a different set of co-authors, we looked at reasoning models. So a O1 preview was the model we tested, as well as Vincent AI, which is one of the retrieval augmented generated tools that VLEX produces. And if you look at the VALS AI benchmarking study, they're all sort of roughly in the same area. Some excel, there's co-counsel and Harvey and VLEX, and some are a little bit better at others at some things, and maybe on average Harvey has an edge, but they're all sort of roughly in the same. They all basically work the same way. I'll put it that way. And so what we found there is actually big improvements in quality across most tasks. We had, I think, about 150 participants who were, upper level law students at University of Minnesota and University of Michigan. We had 6 different tasks. And on 5 of those tasks, we saw statistically significant improvements, not only in the speed, but also in the quality of the work done. Now, there are a few additional sort of key elements there that the sort of key takeaways, and I'm happy to dig more into any of this.
Well, but yeah, before you do, let me ask, because that raises a question for me. Like, do you have a sense as to where the improvement came from? from GPT-4 to those newer models?
Yeah. So one of the things we did, because we had very detailed rubrics, grading rubrics, but we had sort of consistency in the grading criteria across all the different tasks. So we were looking at things like accuracy, at analytical depth, at clarity, the types of things that matter, right? When you're saying, okay, the legal, and we saw that in general, there was enhanced professionalism for folks using the legal AI tools, and that doesn't terribly surprise me. Some of them have prompting that sort of structures output in ways that are perhaps a bit more familiar to a practicing lawyer, right? In terms of maybe the structure of a memo, or in terms of the way that you would analyze a complaint or whatever else. But where, to me, the most interesting piece, there are several really interesting pieces, but the most interesting was in the analytical depth analysis. And this is, of course, somewhat subjective, but it was done by professional legal writing instructors who are grading blindly. We saw a real jump in the quality of the analytical analysis from folks using the reasoning model, which is consistent with sort of what we think of the benefits of these reasoning models from being. They're more specialized for complex, higher order, step-by-step analysis. They tend to be better at math and coding. And so if you want to think about like sort of the element of legal analysis that's a bit more like math and like coding in terms of like the analytical rigor and depth, breaking down the question, looking at every element of it, going through each analytical possibility, we saw enhanced analytical depth from the participants who had the AI reasoning model at their disposal. So those are some of sort of what was driving the results. Obviously, it varies by person. It varied by tools, it varied by task, but overall, that's what we saw, and that's, of course, to me, very promising in terms of the capacity of these tools, because I don't think any of us are terribly surprised that these tools, whatever, they can improve your grammar, right? They can improve your punctuation. They can do, you can write very quick gobbledygook on a page and it will make it sound a bit better. But they're doing more than that, at least in our tasks. So
yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, just when you touch on the professionalism point, that's really interesting to me, particularly because the participants we're talking about here were like law students, right? So some of them may have worked out in the real world, some of them probably didn't, and that's definitely a skill that attorneys have to learn, just like
yeah.
anyone else entering the workforce, right? Like you have to learn to sort of operate in a particular language structure. And so it's really interesting to me that like that gives them a real boost, because the AI has already been taught how to do that, and they can just sort of get it to spit out whatever they want, but it will be structured by the AI.
For sure.
It's also interesting. I'm sorry, I interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, I was saying, I do think that's really significant. And I think you're right that, a big part of what junior lawyers need to learn is not just, how to think, but how to present what they think in ways that conform to professional expectations and norms. So I think that is one place where the legal AI tool shined.
Yeah, and this will make me sound like something of a grumpy old man, but I think that skill is becoming less and less gained before they get to the law firms. Just watching the progression of sort of how young attorneys write in the law firm was striking, particularly the sort of post-COVID classes as they were coming out. It was just I can't really make a logical connection there. I mean, they were remote, of course, but like, what is that? Why does that mean they write like in emojis or whatnot? Like, I don't know, but for whatever reason, like that that particular skill has been one that has been more pressing for them to learn. And of course, they did once they got into the system. But yeah. The other thing I was going to mention is in recent discussion with my CTO about this sort of reasoning models and how they're sort of built and that sort of thing. One thing that she mentioned is like there does seem to be a little bit of loss in terms of like the creativity of the models as you train them towards that, which is funny both from like it sort of matches the stereotype that we all think about, like more analytical people versus more creative people.
Yeah.
But it does seem like that as you train them on like math and coding tasks, they lose a little bit of like their creativity.
Although, right, I mean the reasoning models, I don't think they're trained on different. Well, I guess they're trained on different data to do the reasoning piece, but they're relying on the
Yeah,
same foundational model.
they
And
rely on them, but it's sort of a fine tuning process where
right,
they basically take I mean, coding problems, math problems, things that have this, they make sense because like they have an answer, and then you can
right,
use that in the reinforcement learning step to sort of give
fine
them
tune
each
the,
step
the
and
reasoning
train them.
process. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that may be right. I mean, what I would say is one of the things that's clear to me is all these models have, and whether it's reasoning or non-reasoning, or whether it's OpenAI models or Anthropic models or Google models, they all have different sort of pros and cons in ways that are not consistent,
Yeah.
that are individual. So it's like it is very hard to sort of generalize, like, oh, we're gonna get more creativity if you use Anthropic Claude, or if you use GPT 4.5 versus O1 versus O3. I always struggle myself. Well, okay, well, which model should I generally favor OpenAI models. But which, and it probably just was a path dependence, frankly, but which even of the OpenAI models should I use? Should I use 4.5? Should I use O3? Is 4.0 good enough? It's really hard. And I don't think that, the nature of these models means that it's hard to be like, to show this model is more creative or whatnot.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
especially for when you have the time, you have a high stakes problem, and experimenting with those different models can be useful.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of what I tell people is like whenever these models come out, like a lot of the time that we spend is one just almost it's almost a process of like getting to know them, right? Like
That's right. They
what
have
kind of
personalities.
output is going to come out of this thing, and then figuring out like so we have complex like multi-chain sort of multi-node workflows for every task that we do, and then trying to figure out like which model is best for each individual like node of the step. It takes so long. It's
And
one of the reasons, and I mean this kind of goes to your overall research, right? Like it's one of the reasons that I'm very skeptical that horizontal tools in general, so like just either whether that's the foundation models, whether that's some of the other sort of chatbot type interfaces, um, like it's going to be very difficult for lawyers to get the best and sort of consistent results out of them.
I think of it like this. Look, if you're a lawyer and you work at a firm, you have colleagues, maybe Jane is really good for these types of questions and Bob's really good for these types of questions. And maybe you're not sure if Bob or Jane is the right person to go to, and you have instincts, but for some problems, maybe you go to both of them. For some problems, maybe you go to neither of them. For some, it's almost like that. You're not going to know like Bob is always better than Jane, right? Or vice versa. It's just, that's not the way these things work. And so I think that's sort of the way to think about it. Better to have both Bob and Jane available, right?
Yeah, so true.
And to develop instincts about the types of things one of them is better at than the other. Another piece I do want to get out is that it's very important, and it's a little bit where my research is starting to take me now, is some of the risks and limits of these models. Because one of the things that was interesting to me in our results, so in addition to doing all this sort of randomized control trial experiments where we're looking at just like objective metrics of quality, we also did the surveys of our participants. Like, well, how did you feel about the impact of these models? And one of the things that was very interesting to me is people were not very good at knowing whether or not the AI model was helping them with one task versus another task. They sort of had this general sense of it helps me, but they weren't really able to pick out like it really helped me on this task, but it didn't help me on this task. And we actually had that in our data. for one task in particular, it turned out the AI was not very helpful at all, for reasons we can get into. And for a few other tasks, it was extremely helpful, really. But actually, survey like the actual participants didn't pick that up. And to me, that actually has sort of important implications, because I do think that one of the real challenges and risks with AI usage in law is the way that lawyers understand legal problems is oftentimes by working them out in their own head in a sort of chaotic, messy way. So we all know, I don't know if this is going to resonate with most lawyers. I think it will, though. Most of the time, I won't feel like I really understand a legal problem after I read an opinion quickly, or after I read a brief quickly. If I really want to understand a legal problem, I need to read multiple documents. I need to think about it. I sometimes need to talk about it. I sometimes need to do my own writing. It's this like chaotic, messy process. I need to ask myself hypotheticals. And I only get to like deep understanding after this lengthy process. And I do think that there's risk that using AI on legal tasks can make it much harder to know whether what you've got is good, and much harder to deeply understand the problem, deeply build on it. And so I think that's reflected a bit in sort of these results where people weren't understanding when AI was helping them and when it wasn't. And I actually have another paper that I'm working on where we sort of did some legal simulations and similar results where, like, just looking at the way especially junior lawyers reason, like that's how we reason by turning over ideas in our head in lots of different complex ways, and then eventually we develop deep understanding, but it's less like formulaic than many fields. And so I do think that there are a number of contexts in which we need to be wary of using AI. And my bottom line sort of, I'm trying to like come up with these bottom line principles, like things like my bottom line sort of principle is you want to use AI when you're very confident in your ability to evaluate and build upon evaluate the quality of the AI output and build upon it. And so for some types of tasks, for some types of lawyers, you might be very confident that you can use the AI in a way that is going to, you're going to really be able to see, yeah, that's good or that's not good, or here's where I need to expand or not. But there are a lot of settings in which that's not true, where I think using AI can get you in trouble. So I think our results are starting to point in that direction. And that's sort of an area I'm particularly interested in exploring further, because it resonates with me. And I think it resonates with many lawyers in their experience that this is a big downside or risk of AI usage.
Yeah. Um, so you were kind enough to share an early version of that paper with me that really resonated with me. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same point. I don't think I'm breaching any confidences here, but in being involved in some early evaluations of AI tools, the results that I heard back were, and this wasn't, I should say, this was not our tool. This was a different tool. But basically, this AI is amazing. Like, it gives incredible results. Like, it supercharges our lawyers, but we're like terrified to give it to anyone that's not a partner, because like sometimes it just produces gibberish. And like, if you're a partner, then you know it's gibberish, and you can delete that paragraph and move on. But like, what it's producing is convincing. So if you hand this to a junior attorney, they're not going to know. And
Yeah.
it's just going to, I mean, we see cases every single week of this kind of stuff getting into legal briefs that get submitted to courts. And then, there's a lot of pain and suffering.
100%. And I think that does point to this sort of irony here, which is, the nature of just, I guess, technological innovation generally. And it's like that younger people, more junior people, are more willing to try it, are more eager to try it, grow up in a milieu where people are talking about it. I mean, I don't think there's any, teenager or 20-year-old who hasn't used AI a lot. Whereas I think that some older, more experienced people are very set in their ways. They fear technology. They're not interested in it. They do it their way. And I think the irony is, I actually think AI has much more transformative potential and potential to really, of at least in the law, and probably in many settings, but particularly in the law, of people who already have this expertise. And because exactly as you say, like, you can distinguish between stuff that sounds good but doesn't make sense. And so, like, that's good. And in fact, like, that's sort of what a partner's job is,
Yeah.
right? To get the draft from the junior associate and to be able to decide relatively quickly what's good and what's not and edit. And that's exactly the skill set you need to use an AI effectively. So the irony is, really, it should be the senior partners and the senior lawyers who are embracing AI and who will see the most transformative effect. But I think that because of just sort of more general tendencies, and it tends to be the younger folks, and the younger folks can get themselves into trouble. And then I think the senior folks see that and they're like, aha, this proves my priors that AI is terrible and I shouldn't be using it. So it is this sort of cycle, I think, that is ironic and doesn't always match exactly how these tools have the capacity to really change the practice of law.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to do much self-promotion here, but I did a piece on LinkedIn about this very thing, where it's like there are these older lawyers who are sort of set in their ways. They in some cases actually, like, actively antagonistic towards technology. And yeah, exactly as you say, like, the irony is, like, their experience, their legal experience, their legal knowledge is really what is needed to make the most use out of these tools. And it seems like I think I actually touched a nerve. I got some semi angry comments, I think, but, like, I wasn't really trying to rip on. I think it was just the image that can't. Like, I just give my stuff to OpenAI and get an image out, and I don't think about it that much. But I think the image was like an older lawyer, so people thought I was ripping on older lawyers. But anyway, yeah, like, it really wasn't. The point actually I was trying to make is, like, there is a world where this, because you don't have to, like, go in and code. Like, you can just in a lot of cases you just talk to the machine, and which is the exact interface that they're used to doing, right? They talk to someone and stuff comes back. So
one of the things that I think about actually a lot is, what do you need to be really good at using AI? You need to be a good questioner. That's really all it is. It's not like you need to be a good you need to be a good questioner. You need to pick up on distinctions. You need to ask follow-ups. You need to. That's what lawyers are trained to do, right? In some ways, I think lawyers are probably the best trained professionals of anyone's to use AI well, because a huge part of what we're trained, and maybe even to be a little self-promoting, law professors. So what do? We use the Socratic method all day long, right? Like, oh, well, this is a little bit vague. Can you explain that? Oh, what about this follow-up? What about this hypothetical? We use questions to reveal nuances and fully explore legal issues. And that's exactly what you need to be able to use an AI effectively, to be a good questioner. And so I think lawyers in some ways are better situated than pretty much anyone else, including actually probably much better situated than coders a lot of times. Coders are very used to things being at least, somewhat formulaic and getting the same answer each time, being like, well, there's a right answer. And AIs their output doesn't match that, right? It's stochastic, it varies, it's messy, and so I do think lawyers maybe are sort of natural prompt engineers in a way that might surprise many folks who haven't really sort of worked deeply with these tools.
Yeah, and the irony really is, like, where a lot of times where lawyers get into trouble is where they are thinking about AI as, like, a calculator. Like, they're thinking, I'm just going to give it a question and I'm going to get the right answer back. But that's not really what happens, right? Like, it does need, exactly as you said, it needs to be a process. Like, it is much more like working with, I mean, you can stretch the analogy too far, but you are working with another intelligence to get to an answer. You're not just inputting something and getting something back. Like, I hear all the time, like, you say, like, you hear people say, well, I got the, it's broken because it gave me the wrong answer. And I'm just like, it's not broken. It did exactly what it's meant to do.
Right.
So, yeah, there is this interesting way in which like the vagueness that's inherent to our profession, as long as it's employed correctly, can actually be a really powerful tool. So I want to be respectful of your time, Daniel, but if you do have a few more minutes, you mentioned it earlier, there was one task in which in one of your papers in which AI just did not do very well.
Yeah.
And it that really struck me because obviously we build for corporate lawyers. It was a corporate task. It was drafting an NDA, I believe.
Right.
This seems to come up a lot. Like in the Val study, there was this notable like miss on an MFN clause. For whatever reason, they pulled it out as like one of their examples, and everyone jumped on it. I don't know how representative that was of like the performance generally, but like I think all but one of the tools in the study missed this MFN clause, which wasn't strange or anything. And then in your research, obviously, like that NDA task, the AI just doesn't seem to improve their performance in corporate drafting. And then there just seems to be sort of a less focus on the corporate side of the building generally. There's so many, like I was on a Moritz panel recently. Shout out Rebecca. And pretty much all the tools that were represented on the panel were like legal research chatbots, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, like, why do you think that is? Like, why is both performance and sort of just general effort, like, why is it less on the corporate side?
I think there are a lot of things to say here, and I think like I don't have a perfect answer, which is part of why I have a lot of things to say, right? So one thing to say off the bat is there's a little bit of path dependence, right? Like the first tools were chatbots and retrieval augmented generation, which is a very natural fit with legal research. And the major sort of legal tech firms you think of, Westlaw, Lexis, they're legal research principally. And so they bought those tools and they built on them. So I think there's a little bit of sort of path dependence there just in terms of the legal research orientation. I'll say this, I actually think it's sort of interesting. I'm becoming increasingly convinced that like legal research is not the best use case for AI.
No,
In a lot of ways.
Agree,
yeah. I think like it is very helpful. And this goes to what we were talking about earlier about like AI is very helpful when you already have a good sense of the answer. So it's very helpful for like a summary of some broad area of law, though frankly, treatises are fine for that too. But if you want to ask like a really nuanced, difficult legal research question, I actually think a lot of times they can lead you astray. They can look good, but then not be good because you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. That's the problem. You don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
So I think it's ironic that is where a lot of research, a lot of effort has been focused, just because it looked so good. When I saw those first examples of CoCounsel doing what CoCounsel was doing before it got bought up for whatever outrageous price it got bought for, and I'm very happy for the founders of CoCounsel. They made a lot of money and they're great people, but I'm not sure that Westlaw doesn't regret that purchase, or at least the amount they paid for it. So that's part of it.
I totally agree, by the way. Like it feels like the first crop of startups around this basically like just decided to climb Mount Everest before they had even like taken a walk. It was just like the hardest possible task, legal research, and like they all decided to go that direction. It's never made any sense to me, right? Especially with those early models you were talking about, like 2,500 token limits or whatever, like, and you're trying to crack even with RAG. Just no way it can do a good job. 100%. And the models have gotten bigger, the context windows have gotten bigger, RAG has gotten better, so their performance is increasing, but like it still seems like there was a lot of low-hanging fruit that everyone just ignored.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do. Okay, so the question is, okay, well, so why is it that it's helping with litigation-oriented tasks more than transactional-oriented tasks? So where does AI excel? I think AI excels in helping people write well and in helping people um, uh, 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 potentially see new arguments, potentially digest specific information faster, and all that's very helpful for litigation. Now it can be helped. Now it also, I do think it has the capacity, and I guess this is consistent with the thesis of your company, right? To help a lot on transactional sides of things with
It's
drafting.
good to hear you say that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really do. I mean, I think particularly so, like use cases, and this goes back to my central principle. My central principle is AI is incredibly helpful for people who are very good at telling whether or not AI produced output is good or not. And a good transactional lawyer may miss an ambiguity in a clause or may miss it. But if you say, hey, AI, tell me if there are any potential ambiguities in this clause, and it gives you 5 potential ambiguities, you're going to know which ones are real and which ones are not. And then if you say, oh, here's an ambiguity, draft me a potential clause that deals with it, and you'll know if it's good or not. And so I actually think the potential there is massive. Why are we not seeing that in our experiment? So there are a few answers. So one is with the NDA, and it's one of the things that was distinctive about that is just like with any assignment, we tried to make them as realistic as possible. We actually got them all from real lawyers who practicing law firms. So the NDA, we gave folks a template NDA to work with. Say, hey, here's an example. And I think that lawyers or our participants who didn't have an AA, they start with that template and they basically adapted it the way a lawyer would, and it was pretty good for the job. And my suspicion, though, I need to sort of dig back into the data to really look at this in a way that I'm not sure I'm going to. It's like 150 different assignments there, but like I wonder whether the AI wasn't always as faithful about using that template, or tried to take out and adapt the template in ways that actually made it worse. I wonder if maybe folks who had the AI relied less on the template, but like, oh, I don't need it, I have the AI. I wonder if we certainly did a little bit of training, and we we suggested to folks that if they have a document that's useful, they should feed it into the AI and say, hey, this is helpful. I don't know if people did that. I don't know what type of prompts they put in there. Maybe they put in there, hey, here's one example, but now I want you to do this, and they weren't clear, like, this is a good template, use this template, and suggest ways. The way I would start with that would be something like, if I have a template for an NDA and I think it's a good template and I have a particular circumstance, probably what I would do first is start off saying, look, I don't want you to reproduce the whole thing. Show me where I need to change this template AI to adapt it to the situation, and output to me the specific places where I should change and adapt it. Then I might go through and say, are there any portions of the NDA that you think I should, of the sample that you think I should take out that are not relevant, and explain to me why. Then I might go and say, are there any portions of this NDA, and depending on the context, that maybe could be improved, that have ambiguities, or that can be developed. So I would do it in a much more iterative process where I would always be putting as my lodestar the template. Right, it's like someone that reflects years of wisdom and experience, and I just don't know if that's what our participants did. So maybe another way of putting it is you have the shiny AI tool, and you have the less shiny but maybe better, like, conventional, hey, here's a template. Maybe people are too drawn to the shiny AI tool in our experiment. And again, I think it's a real life worry, right? Like, there's a reason why lawyers work off templates all the time, and like, they're really good. They reflect the collective wisdom of many, many years, and so you don't want to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, that may be another instance where, like, a more senior attorney, because it's just drilled into you, right? Like, we don't reinvent the wheel. We're not trying to be creative. Like, if it's been done 15 times before, then it just should look exactly like it was done 15 times before, because we know that one works.
Exactly.
But you don't know that until you're taught that. So
yeah. No, absolutely.
Well, look, Daniel, I already taken up way too much of your time. I really appreciate you sticking around. Let me just wrap us up here. So I do want to mention we're presented by Marveri. Marveri is an AI-powered platform that helps corporate lawyers quickly make sense of large groups of documents. It's super useful for M&A, onboarding new clients, really any legal task that requires quickly understanding a lot of documents. People can learn more and sign up for a demo at marveri.com. Daniel, if there's anything you want to plug, if you got anything upcoming, if you want to tell people where to find you, anything like that.
Yeah, I would say that, I'd love, I always want people to read my research, share it, and whatever. And so all of my research is available online. I don't know if we can put up links, but if you want to find it, you can just Google my name, and I have a very unusual spelling of my name, which makes me easy to find on Google. It's Schwarc, as in cat Z. So Daniel Schwarcz. If you just Google me, you can find my research on SSRN. Download any of it for free. Share it. Let me know what you think. Email me, and I love to engage with folks.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining me today. Maybe we'll come back sometime. There's so much interesting stuff to talk about around this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much again.